Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my early review for Avatar The Last Airbender, Aang's Unfreezing Day, or to give it the full title, Avatar The Last Airbender Chibi's Volume 1, Aang's Unfreezing Day. I separate them just because on the book itself, Chibi's never really gets mentioned anywhere, or Volume 1. Now, obviously with a digital review copy, I don't have the spine of the book, so I don't know if that says anything, like if there is a 1 on the spine. But just the front of the book obviously just says Avatar The Last Airbender, Aang's Unfreezing Day, and it's basically the same with the back of the book, where it just is a general description of the book. So kind of take that how you will, and so on. So yeah, I do have an early review copy of this, thanks to Dark Horse for giving it to me. So the first thing I do want to talk about with this book is just that I think a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, hey, I remember this book, what happened to it? So the situation with this, the history on this, announced February 2021 for a July 2021 release date, delayed multiple times for a very long time, now coming out January 2023, January 31st, 2023, so basically February. One of the most delayed Avatar books ever. And why is this the case with a Chibi comic that there isn't a huge amount of interest in? The only other thing of note along the way is that the preview for this book was in this year's Free Comic Book Day issue. Instead of a brand new Aang story like the cover and Dark Horse's description suggests, you just get like a third of this book, like 10 pages of this, in the Free Comic Book Day book. It was nice to get a look at what the book actually is, but it was a bit weird, especially given that, again, I think at the timing that this happened, this book had a different release date and was much closer. So it basically got its preview that suggested that the whole book is done, and then got delayed into 2023. So it was a really unfortunate situation for this. And again, look, Dark Horse will explain that this is all because of, basically COVID, shipping / printing issues. But it feels like something different happened with this book. There's no way to explain such a massive delay like this when other books have hit their release dates and so on. It's just a weird situation overall. So that out of the way, what is this book? Why do we randomly have a Chibi comic, and how do we classify this book? Like, what is this? Is this canon? Is it non-canon? What's going on? The reality of this is that fundamentally, they never make any official direct statement about if this book is canon or not, which fundamentally is really the only way to say if it is or isn't. In their descriptions, marketing stuff, they've said that, Tim Hedrick, writer from the shows, is involved in this, which makes me believe that that is their way of, roughly saying that this is meant to be viewed as being canon, because otherwise, most people associate Avatar Chibi stuff with the Chibi shorts, and there's been a previous Chibi short comic before in the Lost Adventures, which was, again, more in line with the shorts than what this book is. So, is it part of the kind of crazy Chibi universe where, Kyoshi's the gym teacher and you can have all this wild stuff like dead characters interacting with other characters and people doing absurd things? This doesn't seem to be that. What this seems to be is their first ever attempt at doing a book that is just directly aimed at young readers. They have decided to give that young reader book the Chibi cartoony art style. It is still, I think, roughly meant to be considered canon, but it just makes you question a few little things. Because that's the weird thing with this book, in terms of getting into the first kind of opinion on this, is that I think this book, by really not making a decision on what it wants to be, makes the worst decision. It doesn't choose to be the crazy over-the-top Chibi action where just wild stuff is happening, which could have been very fun for young readers, and we as more hardcore fans can just be like, fair enough. I'll read that for a bit of fun, and I can just dismiss it. It also isn't just the case of them trying to tell a story, a normal Avatar comic story that just happens to have a chibi art style. They go for this weird point in the middle where it's slightly leaning towards chibi tendencies, but never doing anything crazy, but also never actually really doing anything with any of the characters or with the plot necessarily. And so, even accounting for the fact that it's aimed at young readers and stuff like that, I still feel that this book deserves a little bit of criticism for just not doing all that much. And that Avatar is fundamentally a kids' franchise. It's a Nickelodeon show. Now, I know it stands out as being a little bit different than that. It can have bigger moments. And I think more people do consider it more in a way of a leaning towards YA franchise rather than directly for kids. But this book feels like a weird statement to be like, this is a separate style of story because the kids can't be reading like The Promise or like The Lost Adventures or anything like that for some reason. We have to go lower. And I just think for Avatar, it's not really needed. And so what this book I think should have been is just full-on, non-canon, wild chibi hijinks. That way you get the most out of this art style. You don't have people worrying about if it's important or not or anything like that. And that solves most of your problems. Because for me, the highlight of this book is 100% the fact that you get like 32 pages of Diana Sim art doing the chibi art style, and that works really well. It's very characterful. I just feel, in a way, the art is let down by the writing not allowing that much of interest to happen. And getting into what the book is actually about, there's no spoilers here. So look, the back of the book, like let me read out the back of the book to just highlight how basically there's nothing to spoil in this book. So the back of the book says, "Can you imagine not knowing your own birthday? That's the situation for Aang, who was frozen in an iceberg for 100 years. Luckily, his friends Katara, Toph, Sokka, and Zuko have a plan to surprise him with a new special day to celebrate. They'll have to be careful while they prepare. It's a surprise." Now, straight away, so you know, okay, it's going to be the other characters hiding this birthday celebration from Aang. So he's going to be sad upon meeting all these characters, and then the surprise will happen. Birthday, cool. And that's exactly what happens in the book. Except, weirdly, Aang's birthday is not mentioned a single time in this book. I was blown away. I went back and reread this book a few times because I just couldn't believe that there was this disconnect here. Because to me, the most interesting thing about this book heading in was how they would tackle explaining to us the reasoning behind why Aang doesn't remember his birthday. Now, of course, he's been in ice for 100 years. I guess selective amnesia over very specific parts of his life, like his birthday, is one of those things. But I was looking for an explanation on that, and that the logic behind this Unfreezing Day celebration would be to be a replacement birthday, which is basically what the back of the book says it is. But the comic itself does not communicate that at all. Like I said, Aang's birthday is not mentioned by Aang himself, by any of the other characters. This is literally just an Unfreezing Day celebration. They just say it's the anniversary of the day Aang came out of the ice and they're celebrating it. Nothing is ever particularly suggested that this is his new birthday, other than the fact that it's a party that kind of looks like a birthday party, but again, in a way it's like a general anniversary celebration thing. And you might think that's being a little bit nitpicky, but again, it's bolded on the back of the book. Can you imagine not knowing your own birthday? And I'm like, when has it ever been established that Aang doesn't remember his birthday? And you haven't brought us up to speed on that. So, okay, what that I guess means is that the main canonical takeaway from this book is that Aang's birthday will always be celebrated as the anniversary of the day he came out of the ice. Which means that this book is technically set, I guess, 3 months after the end of the series, because most of us assume it takes place over the course of 9 months, because 3 seasons pass basically. So okay, it's set there. But then this gets into the other side of things. Like, you have a Chibi comic, you have the option to kind of in a way do whatever you want here. Where's Suki in all of this? Why is Suki the only Team Avatar member left out of this? I thought we were past this with this franchise a few years ago, where we'd have Team Avatar shots that don't include Suki. I thought we were past this whole idea, and she was now much more heavily included in all of these things. And yes, it's just a Chibi comic, but why isn't she there? And that's, I think, the point with this, is that, okay, I get it, they're who you view as being your main characters, but why is Sokka's girlfriend not present at this party? There's that sort of situation as well. She is a member of the team. Why isn't she here? Why isn't Mei here as Zuko's girlfriend? Because again, apparently this is set before the events of like the promise and stuff like that. So it's before they've broken up. So Mei should be here theoretically, because the party takes place in the Jasmine Dragon, where the group was all together at the end of the series. So why aren't those same characters back for this? And again, this isn't the sort of comic that's going to explain why these characters aren't here, so it just feels like they're left out for no particular reason. And it feels like I'm not going to let this comic get away with that just because it's for young readers and like you can explain all that away, because it seems like it's trying to tell a sort of sincere story. It just doesn't do enough. And that's the whole point here of like, why have you told like a story that basically has very little substance to it, aiming it at young readers, when are you seriously trying to make the point with this that like young readers shouldn't read, like, say, The Lost Adventures, they shouldn't read The Promise, they shouldn't watch ATLA itself? That's the kind of issue with Chibis, I think, going forward, is that, like, unless you actually deliver something of note, it just feels like the best you can say about this is that it's a little bit of fun. And that's always a positive point, a praising of something in a review that I'm never the biggest fan of. Because if the best thing you can say about a book is that it was fun, what are you actually saying? Because if you're a fan of a franchise, you are in general going to view nearly everything in that franchise as being fun in some way. Even if it's like the different emotions, like tragic, sad scenes and stuff like that. You're fundamentally getting enjoyment, fun, out of experiencing that content here. So I think that's going to be a bit of a weird one to kind of lay on this one. Because, like, yes, reading through it, yeah, sure, it's fun, but it's mainly, I think, through the art rather than through the writing. And like I said, it's like, I don't think in this book we learn anything about Aang or any of the other characters, really. And so the main takeaway is just the unfreezing day itself as apparently a day of celebration for Aang. But like I said, that whole point about the lack of mention of his birthday, I think it's this kind of borderline unforgivable thing, because it speaks to a disconnect between sort of like the marketing material on this book, where the description says this thing, which actually has more notable information about the plot than the book itself has. Otherwise, about the most serious kind of point in the book that you can, I think, look to is right before the party starts. Iroh comes out to speak to Aang, and there's a little bit of kind of like, okay, that's kind of nice overall, but you know, it's still fundamentally, it's got its jokes, that basically Aang's interaction with each of the characters sets up a specific joke, and they just address that here. It's very kind of simplified. And again, it's that sense of, because the dialogue is in a way done like this, does that mean it's non-canon? But again, it never does anything that makes it feel like it's full on wild, chibi, crazy things are going to happen. In terms of continuity, I think the main thing that kind of stands out to me is just that, like, it's book 3 Aang, clearly after the events of the series, but he's using his, like, original glider, which should have been burned, rather than his book 3 glider that the Mechanist made for him, which seems like a kind of notable error in all of this, unless it's not meant to be canon, at which point that doesn't really matter. but then what are we doing here? You know, that sort of thing. Now, one other thing to note about this book is that the actual content of the story is only like 32 pages. There's about 10 other pages left in the book. And that's what they do for this section at the back of the book called the How to Make Comics section. Now, ultimately, this looks very similar to your extras section that you get at the back of, say, like a library edition for a Korra comic, or art extras that you get at the back of like an Avatar comic. It's just got a little bit more text that describes the different sections of like comic process. And I actually like this. I actually appreciate this quite a bit, that they just explain the process a little bit more. They have all the concept stuff for the chibi designs, which is really nice to see, because again, the art is 100% the highlight here. You get to see the revisions and stuff like that, the little notes that are given to the artists and stuff like that, the corrections, how the cover kind of comes together, a little bit of the script overall. And I think it's actually like quite nice to have this, and rather than just the library editions, which for instance will literally just be like, here's the image, and then it basically just says sort of like concept sketch by whoever, and they don't really like explain to you what it is. I kind of appreciate that they're just like, hey, if a young reader wants to get this book, they get to this section at the back and they realize that like, that's how a comic's put together. But also it's like, it feels like in general it's nice to have it just be a little bit more kind of well presented overall. So look, I don't want to be too harsh on this book, because, you know, it is for young readers, but I don't think just it being for young readers means that you have to throw every bit of criticism aside. I still found myself, even with very low expectations, being fundamentally disappointed that I just felt like the book was a little pointless in the end. And so if I was to give this like a review score, I feel it's probably like a 6.5, where it probably feels a little bit too harsh to get into 6 and just consider it like absolutely, you know, right in the middle of average. But 7 is too high a score here. It feels like it's 6.5 with that extra 0.5 being earned completely by the artist, and most of the score that's missing just coming down to, I think, the book not really being clear on what exact tone it wants to take as a young reader book, the confusion surrounding is it canon or not, and then blaring like issues like the bit of a miscommunication between the back of the book and then the actual contents of the story itself. I don't think when this book comes out, people are going to be freaking out too much about what actually happens in it. I can see certain panels from the art getting maybe highlighted on social media, like what tends to happen already, but because it's chibi stuff, it's very fun and it's the focus and it's from a very popular artist. So I think the art will be celebrated quite a bit, but it will ultimately be a relatively forgettable book for most fans ultimately. And then in terms of the kind of young reader recommendation, I'm like, well, sure, in terms of like very young readers, I guess give them this, but to get context for this, you have to have watched Avatar The Last Airbender. And if you're anyway old enough to watch Avatar The Last Airbender and understand it, just go on to the actual comics. If you maybe think the actual comics deal with a little bit more complicated subject matters, go for the Lost Adventures. Go for the short story collection stuff, rather than going low and aiming down with this. So I do think there's that little bit of like, who is this book for as such? And I think it's a very limited section of people that this book is actually for. Now, will they do a Chibi Volume 2? It's been so long since this first one was announced, you would think Volume 2 would have already been announced. I'm guessing they're maybe going to wait and see how this does. I'd be okay with a Volume 2 if they can get just the schedule quicker. Like, it's a 30-page comic, which I get comics take a long time to make, but it shouldn't take like a year and a half for a book to come out and be delayed by that much. So if they do another one, just have it be based around something of significance happening. And then if you want to, I'd borderline be okay with just go full on chibi. Make it crazy, make it interesting because of its craziness, and lean into it being non-canon. I think that's what would make this stand out a little bit more, rather than trying to basically, in a way, tear everything away that could possibly make this book interesting and just have the bare minimum to make it be like, oh, but it's still canon. I don't know. It's just one of those ones where, like, look, I get it. I'm being a bit critical of this comic that is ultimately for kids, but it, people want to know the full situation here. I think I'd be misrepresenting this book if I just went in full positivity and was just like, it's so much fun and stuff like that. And it's like, sure, that aspect is there, but I also think that aspect is present in basically every piece of Avatar content, and saying that about this comic is not really saying like anything at all. So for collectors, you're probably going to want to get this for your collection, especially because the physical book of this is going to be a hardcover, which is interesting. It's going to be a small hardcover, I guess, highlighting it is a bit of a different series because of that. For people who just want the notable story content, I probably would say you don't need this. Really, I really don't think you need this. There is nothing here that you learn about, Toph, Sokka, Katara, anything like that, about Aang necessarily. Just by reading the description for this book, you get the idea that, okay, sure, the main canonical takeaway is that his birthday is now going to be considered the Unfreezing Day, which they don't actually say in the book itself, which is crazy to me. So in the comments, let me know if you have any questions about this book or thoughts on it. But otherwise, that's been it. My review for Chibi Volume 1, Aang's Unfreezing Day. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.